You probably have an unfinished army project laying around, maybe even a few gray armies. And if that's the case, you and I have something in common. But today, that changes. I'm gonna take my partially finished Star Wars Legion army and put a bow on it in an epic marathon where I paint not 2, not 3, but 4 units to round out my force. It's good timing too, because I don't think my viewers can take another unfinished project.
You have failed me for the last time.
In last week's video, we began on some KX security droids, but I'm gonna pivot to something else more exciting for now. I printed out a new unit for my army, an elite police force kind of unit, almost SWAT-like. These guys will count as Imperial Special Forces, but allow me to avoid painting endless black armor because I'm taking them in a different direction. And that direction is Molotov Chrome. I'll take any excuse I can get to bust this paint out. This paint is best applied through an airbrush, and the reason for that is in order to get the ultra shiny chrome look of this paint, you need to apply a fair amount of it. You can actually see the moment where it turns from kind of a regular looking metallic paint into a mirror finish. That's when I apply enough of this paint. With the Molotov Chrome drying for several hours, I now can start shading it. First, I don't want these guys to have bright mirror chrome armor. So I bust out some Tamiya clear that has no color in it at all, some thinner X20A, and a tiny bit of black ink so I can make this armor look a little smokier. Tamiya does make a smoky gloss product, but I figured I could try this out first before buying a new thing. Unfortunately, while doing this step, because the paint was so diluted, I couldn't really tell if anything was happening, and I unfortunately overdid it a little bit and got some weird, bizarre pooling on some of the larger, flatter panels. It might be hard to see on camera because this stuff is so reflective, but maybe you can see it here on this guy's chest and on this character's back panels. My solution to this was to mix a smokier version of this layer and to do it again, because honestly, I didn't make that much of a difference on the first layer. Hopefully in doing this, I can hide my mistakes a little bit, and that worked for one of the models, but this guy's chest is still a little messed up looking. I think I'll chalk it up to a learning lesson at this point and just move on. Speaking of moving on, I'm gonna take some Tamiya clear blue, thin it down with, again, X20A, and apply some shadows to these guys. I am blown away how well this Tamiya clear product behaves while airbrushing, because number one, it's a glossy product, and typically those tend to cause spider webbing more often, but furthermore, I am airbrushing on top of Molotov Chrome, the glossiest thing that I own, and it's not going anywhere. It's like really sticking down where I put it and creating a lovely blue shadow. Now that being said, it doesn't look anything like this product. It looks more teal than anything. And now I'm sure if I keep applying layer after layer of this, it will eventually get to here, but I'm also discovering that I'm kind of overdoing it accidentally in certain spots, and it's difficult to undo this kind of stuff. I can't really just paint with Molotov Chrome again over top of it, because you really need to flood the surface with that stuff to get the effect you're after, and that would just obliterate any blue shadow that I would have. So you need to be careful when applying Tamiya clear as a shadow to Molotov Chrome. It kind of builds up a lot faster than you think. For a little bit of definition, I broke out one of my favorite wash products ever, and that's Tamiya Panel Liner. Its capillary action and its ability to stay dark in the cracks is literally unparalleled. Unfortunately for me, however, Tamiya's panel liner had other plans. Ugh, enamel gods, why have you forsaken me? It's honestly crazy how much variance there is in dry time across the enamel market. When I look at the back of the bottle on Tamiya panel liner, which I should have done in the first place, it says to clean it away with enamel thinner after it's air dried, which happens in minutes. But with something like Villainy ink, I can wait hours and hours, and it wipes away with just a clean swab and like no thinner needed. Luckily for me, it didn't take that long to get where I'm at right now, and so I'm just gonna reapply Molotov Chrome, do another black tint, use a blue that I prefer to the one that I used, and we'll be back to square one. Square two? Doing hive? Seven? 14? Shout out to my millennials and Gen Xers who get that reference. Finally, I was back to where I was before, and I waited 1 measly hour before wiping away the Tamiya panel liner, and it still won't come off. What is happening? Is this enamel wash or is it not? There were a very few times when it did wipe away super easily, but for the most part, I'm not really wiping this away with a chemical. I'm just abrading it off the model. Panel liner says to use the enamel thinner from Tamiya to wipe it off, and I kind of knew that was going to just totally mess up the paint, but I don't have any of it, so I tried using Mr. Color Thinner, which I believe is also an enamel thinner, and yeah, it wiped away silver paint and blue tint and that stuff immediately. So I don't know how to best wipe away Tamiya panel liner, but what I will say is this wash works so freaking well that if I was just a little bit more careful while I was applying it, I wouldn't need to wipe anything away ever. So I think that's probably a better strategy if you want to use this stuff. Some of you in the comments are probably thinking, Scott, why don't you apply some kind of varnish over the model before doing this? And I wouldn't want to do that with Molotow Chrome because that would totally murder the finish that this paint has. And that's the whole point of using this stuff, is to have it be super bright and shiny and kind of chrome. This looks good enough, honestly, though, so I'm happy just to move on. This is kind of the downside of base coating a model in Molotow Chrome, that the rest of the model is also now chrome and is in need of base coats, as opposed to the beige of the Stormtroopers in last week's video that could just take a simple contrast paint on the less important details like belts and be done. However, the majority of this model is metal stuff, so I feel like it's an okay trade-off. After all the base coats are nice and opaque, it's time to moving on to doing some highlighting. It's hard to know how bright of a highlight to mix sometimes. I will often try it on the model and then adjust as needed. Here in this example, I didn't go bright enough, and so I mixed more highlight in and then came back to paint that initial little bag. And like I normally like to do, I like to mix a few different highlights and apply them where it makes sense. On a lot of these details, like the bags and straps around his thighs, you don't need much of a transition, just one bright color to stand out against the dark base coat. So this is a nice recessed shade dividing all the details. You guys may have noticed my not so subtle Miniac product placement laced throughout this video. If you guys are interested in my Miniac cutting mat or my brush coffin, I have both of those available at miniac.co. Picking up stuff from the web store is one of the best ways to support me right now. I also sell a bunch of miniatures as well in 32mm scale, display scale, and even a bust on there. A friggin' cheerleader, dude. A friggin' cheerleader! The brush coffin has slots for brushes, obviously, but it's also 2 tiers of foam with a wider slot on the bottom for larger tools as well. The cutting mat is double-sided. It has an Imperial grid on one side with a different design and a metric on the other with the classic Miniac logo. It's 3mm thick, so she a thick one, and it's self-healing like all cutting mats are. That's all for now. Back to painting those glorious imps. On larger details, like on the fabric visible on his arms, I want there to be more of a visible transition. I did the same thing for the blue color as well. However, I was beginning to notice a bit of a problem. I fear that I picked the wrong colors for these details. The armor itself is kind of cold and very in your face, super reflective. And these details break up all the silver armor in a very nice way, but they need to have the proper contrast, which is why I used yellow to mix highlights for these colors. I figured the warmth of the yellow would separate it from the cold of the armor, but I think gray is too close to silver in kind of hue, and so maybe that's a problem, and blue is just kind of always blue, even when you mix yellow into it. The front of the model just feels very busy right now. When I look at the back of the model, everything looks kind of like right and nice, and I think it's working out well. I'm not writing it off completely yet. I think once I paint the gun and the face, I'll have more thoughts, but I have one more idea to make this armor a little bit more poppy. I took some black ink and mixed it with that tenebrous gray that I was using earlier and did a bit of recessed shading on some of the silver parts. I'd say about on 80% of the recesses on the model, the Tamiya panel liner did a good job, but in certain areas, it just kind of wiped away, or wasn't there to begin with. I'm hoping this will help to break up all the silver and give it a bit more clarity. Because Molotow Chrome has to flood the surface of the model to get that mirror finish, I fear my second coat of it obscured some of the shallower details on the model, leading to this problem. Because personally, I've never experienced this before with panel liner. Something else that will give the model a bit more clarity is to take care of this gun that is center mass on most of these miniatures. And I'm gonna do that in a pretty simple way by just base coating it with a transparent black product. Next, we're doing a bunch of Caucasian faces. I start with a darker base coat and then layer up about 3 different highlights from there. While painting faces on minis like these, let your inner display painter out. This is one of the last parts of the miniature, and so I'm kind of savoring it. I want it to end on a super good note here. The face is also going to help to, again, break up all this very reflective silver paint and just give it more context, make it make more sense. A couple of tips for you when painting tiny faces. Sometimes models at this scale have eyebrows sculpted, and I almost never paint eyebrows. I instead just leave a little shadow under the eyebrow of the original base tone and make sure to highlight this part of the eye. That remaining darker base coat kind of looks like an eyebrow without being too intense. I find that whenever I try to paint an eyebrow out, it just looks like I did exactly that. I painted an eyebrow on it. It looks super bad. So this is a nice midway point to get a more subtle effect. With all the faces looking nice, now it's time to paint the hair. Now it doesn't make sense for everyone in the squad to have the same color hair, and so I painted them all a little bit different. Some redheads, some black hair, an old man in there, a blondie, all colors of the rainbow. Except for, the non-natural hair colors of the rainbow, I suppose. To finish off this unit, I'll paint a few little red and blue LEDs, glue them to my pre-finished bases, and we're done with unit number 1. All right, Imperial Special Forces unit number 1 complete, and honestly, I'm feeling a bit mixed about them. The purplish color that I ended up with for the belts and bags is not really what I wanted to do. I was going for the warm gray color that I have on Iden or like on the Imperial Agent. I used this color from AK called Tenebrous Gray, which on the palette looks exactly like the mixture that I had while painting my Imperial Agent. But the lighter colors you add, the more purple it becomes. And I tried to offset this by mixing in yellow to neutralize the purple in there, but it didn't really do it. It still kind of looks purpley. And that color is found nowhere else in my army, and I have no plans of adding that color to my army. And so it's just kind of strange. I don't know if you are like this, but I could tell this was a problem pretty early on in the scheme, but I just kept going. I don't know why I do that, I could have just stopped and pivoted immediately, but I didn't, and I'm kind of like stuck with them now. But that's okay. I think I'm gonna let the feeling simmer for a little bit and see how I feel, in a couple of days and stuff like that. When I have the entire army together, see how I feel. I don't think it's a good idea to make a rash decision right now about repainting something. But right now, I need an easy win. So let's move on to a unit that I basically already have started. Let me catch you up. In the last video, I started my K2 security droids. And we began by applying a highlight with desaturated blue and then pairing that highlight back with some black ink. The next step I took on these droids was stupid and took forever, and I lost the footage anyways, so I'm going to show you a different approach I took to get my shiny robots. If you watched last week's video, you saw me do the black on my Imperial Agent, and that was shockingly simple. With the black base coat, I applied one blue stark highlight layer and then blended between the base coat and that blue layer with one simple glaze. And then it was pretty much done. I want to give that a shot on these models. This process is all about picking a few perspectives for your model and painting for those perspectives. For me, I obviously have a front-on perspective I care about that's slightly skewed to the right. I find that skewing your light source or your perspective one way makes for a more interesting paint job than something that's just front-on and totally symmetrical. Once you have those perspectives locked in, you can start to carve out some shapes. Whether or not you know how to paint something that looks shiny and glossy like metal, or in this case, glossy black robots, your eye is going to be a fantastic judge of whether or not what you're doing looks good or not. Even before blending, I can look at certain parts of what I'm trying to do and identify that something is wrong. And I don't always know what the right solution is to fix the problem, and so I'll try a few different things. I'll try rounding off a sharp edge. I'll try connecting two highlights together. I'll try splitting a larger highlight apart into smaller pieces. Sometimes the answer isn't obvious, and you need to try a few different things until you get something that looks a little bit better. One thing that may mess up your eye when doing this technique is that when applying the highlights, you need to make them much larger than if you were just painting them normally. The reason for this is that we're going to reduce these highlights in size by painting into them with an intermediate color. When doing that, they're going to get smaller. And so because of that, I have to make them larger now. So the model may look a little goofy. I mixed an intermediate color to do my glazing and then thinned it down. On long and narrow highlights like on the legs and arms, I brushed in the direction of those highlights, up and down the limbs. In larger areas where I had more maneuverability, I brushed toward the black and not toward the blue. I'm taking advantage of the fact that the blue is going to be more impacted by this glaze than the black. Where I lift my brush off, a bunch of paint's going to deposit. And if I brush toward the blue, I'm going to get a really bizarre border instead of a nice smooth transition. At least that's the theory. In practice, it was fairly difficult to get this to work well. I think on the Imperial agent, the small volumes of the gloves and bags behaved more. Whereas on the larger volumes of the robot body, there's just a lot more surface area to mess things up and to see transitions. Ultimately, I wouldn't do this again, but I'm still on the hunt for a great tabletop black. For someone like me, it could be very tempting to continue to blend these blue highlights. But I think that if I just do a little bit of recessed shading, a little edge highlighting, paint a few other details, they'll look fine. So we're gonna move on. Next up, I wanted to work on the metallic parts. And if you've been a fan of the channel for any amount of time, you know I like to keep this part pretty simple. For small little accents, all I do is a simple base coat of natural steel from AK Interactive and a glossy black wash of Nuln oil. For small parts, this is good enough for me. Now I want to do some edge highlighting. I like to organize my painting in this way because often while I'm base coating, I'll make mistakes, particularly on the edges of details. So if I save a step for later, not only will I not have to redo work, but I can also clean up some of the mistakes that I'm making with the silver with this edge highlight. With the edge highlighting complete, I moved on to doing some recessed shading. There wasn't a whole lot to do here, just the ring around the neck, the box on his back, the segments on the legs, and anywhere else where I needed to do some cleanup. This step and the edge highlighting step really clean up the optics of the model and let you know if the earlier blending that you did was good enough. And in my case, I think it was. But there's still more to do on the Mini, and the more it gets painted, the more those things will kind of be less important. Speaking of, let's paint some LEDs. The trick to painting these tiny little LEDs without suffering too much is to use thick, unthinned paint. Not only is this going to cover these little spots in one coat, but also the paint isn't going to run away when you apply it down on these tiny little spots. Too much water and it begins to act like a wash, and the surface tension breaks, and then it spreads to the surrounding little areas. And with that step done, we have one more step to do. I want to apply a satin varnish to these models because there's a lot of difference of finish between the primer layer that I used and the black that I used for correctional steps. Not only will it hide this issue, but I believe also some of my poor blending will be hidden by the fact that the sheen is a little bit more satin than it currently is right now. The KX Security Droids are done and they are looking great next to their Stormtrooper Riot companions, but I gotta be honest, I did not necessarily enjoy painting these figures. It probably has to do with the fact that they're all kind of one color essentially, and I know I could have painted them differently, but I do want this army to look somewhat accurate with just a little bit of my spin on it, and so I wanted to stick with the black. To get a break from painting some cold black, we're gonna paint another unit of Riot Troopers, but this time a different set of models. The other minis I've painted have come from Anvil Rage, and these guys come from Skullforge and are kind of more of a police force vibe, which I love. However, to start them, we're gonna paint the black shields. Look, I know I said I wanted a break from painting the cold to black, but I learned something when I was painting the last 8 Riot Troopers, and that is that it is much easier to mask off the shield than it is the rest of the miniature. To mask the shields, I used some putty, but I think that was a little overkill. Part of what makes these shields so easy to mask is that they're small and separate from the body, but also because other areas don't need to be masked because they're really easy to clean up. For instance, like the back of the shield. If I get some tan on the back of the shield, I'll just hit it with a black contrast paint and call it a day. Good enough. I think it might have been smarter to use, to me, a masking tape for the shields, not worry about the edges or the back. It would have been accurate, it would have been faster, and also would have gotten the way less of the parts of the armor that are nearby the shields, like the forearm and the shoulder armor, for instance. Having controlled overspray that you know is easy to fix is a great way to make masking a lot more tolerable. It also allows for more opportunities for you to airbrush multiple parts of the models, knowing that you don't have to perfectly mask everything off, because it doesn't really matter, because it's easy to fix. Okay, that was more masking commentary that you asked for, so back to painting the models. With the black paint job all covered up, I went into base coats with AK Interactive Light Earth and Chocolate, same as the Stormtroopers in the last video. I'm doing pretty much a base coat here, leaving black behind in only the deepest recesses. Just like with the Stormtroopers, these guys went through 2 rounds of highlights, one with AK Interactive's Light Earth with no brown in it, and then Tamiya flat white. But I want to be a little bit more specific about dilutions with the airbrush because I know it's often a challenging thing to describe. Right now you're seeing me in real time try to apply Tamiya white as a highlight to this Riot Trooper, and not a whole lot is happening. And to me, that is a signal that this is diluted too much. So I stop, add some more paint to my mixture to thicken it up, and then resume and get a much better and faster result. And then with a mixture of red, yellow, and a small amount of black ink, and also a ton of thinner, I apply highly diluted yellowish filters to the areas of shadow. If you're a fan of Star Wars, which I assume you are, you should check out this Thrawn bust by Sam Kress. He gifted it to me last year when I met him at Meeple-a-thon. Super nice guy, awesome painter. Sam and I are both judges at the Lavender Painting Competition at Meeple-a-thon in Kansas City, held at Bartle Hall. In fact, I'm also teaching classes there as well. So if you're liking any of these airbrushing tips that I am sharing here, you can come and take an airbrushing class with me at the convention. I'm teaching 2 different classes, one on layering and one on beginner airbrushing, and 2 slots for both of them, so 4 classes total. It's a lot of availability to get in. Again, this is in Kansas City at Bartle Hall. I'll have my classes linked down in the description below. I want to see you there. And now for the magical step. Because we have a nice zenithally applied highlight on essentially the entire model, we can apply some slightly diluted with water speed paint to do the rest of our blackish grayish cloth. With a larger brush, I paint the majority of the lower half of the model because it's just all dark down there. And then with a smaller brush, I do the parts in between the arms, etc. For the belt on the helmet, I was concerned I wouldn't be accurate enough with the speed paint to not get black all over the place, so I just painted that with a normal black paint. This gives us our warm black that we were seeking in our start to finish video when I painted my Imperial agent, as opposed to the cold black of the shield. And we're getting it because the undercoat that we applied due to the white armor was warm, and it's still kind of peeking through a little bit right now. And then when that layer dries, we're going to further reinforce that warmth with a highlight of gray, with a black mixed with a warm highlight. Just like with the earlier Imperial Special Forces unit, I mixed multiple different ratios of off-white, yellow, and gray to get my highlights on these Riot Troopers, and use those mixtures where it makes sense. Higher up on the shoulders and arms, a brighter gray. Lower down by the legs, it's a darker gray. In some cases, I do a bit of a blend of multiple colors on a larger surface. With that done, I can hit it all with a nice gloss varnish in preparation for that all-important enamel wash. It is now the next day, and it's time to wipe away this enamel wash. Save your comments about how voluptuous my hair is. I know. I've been looks-maxing recently, and the commenters are noticing. Last time I cleaned up Villainy Ink enamel panel liner, I waited about 5 or 6 hours. This time I waited about 15 hours, and still I was able to wipe away all the enamel with no mineral spirits at all. Just a clean cotton swab came right off. Some tips on how to do this best: you want to wipe perpendicular to the details, even in really weird and cramped sections. That's how you get the best chance that the enamel sticks around. Also, waiting longer so it's set up and stronger also helps a lot. With a quick coat of matte varnish, I get on to doing the white edge highlighting. And like usual, I do that with a mixture of white paints, never just one applied to the whole thing. I apply a darker color where relevant and a brighter color where relevant, like on the higher up shoulders and on the helmet, etc. I like to use a real thin and dagger-like brush when doing stuff like this. I feel like it gives me the best control. I'm also constantly wetting my brush and mixing more moisture into my paint to maintain that perfect dilution so the paint wicks off my brush super nicely. Now I'm going to do the green goggles to match the green lenses of my stormtroopers. Starting off with a little bit of a darker base coat and then doing one layer that's a nice bright electric green. On to base coating some silver elements. And this is real simple. One coat of silver on some various accents around the model helps to break up all of the gray and cream color. For the faces on the Riot Troopers, I kept it pretty simple. A fairly saturated base coat applied over 2 layers of paint to get a nice opaque result, and then 1 to 2 highlights, focusing on the nose and the upper cheeks and what tiny part of the forehead is visible. With that squared away, I did some simple eyes with some off-white and black for the pupil and called it done. I've been yapping this entire video, so we're gonna finish out this last unit montage style. Oh, baby. Holy cow. Look at all those beautiful little Imperials. There aren't many better experiences in the hobby than polishing off an entire army. I'm so happy to officially put a bow on a somewhat unofficial series on my channel here in the Star Wars Legion videos. I feel like so very often I start a project and don't finish it. So not only does it feel fantastic to actually finish an army, but it also feels fantastic to finish like a project in a video sense online for you guys to enjoy. And I hope you guys did enjoy it. It seemed like you did in the comments, and that makes me happy as well. I probably painted for the last 9 or 10 days, probably putting in an average of 8 hours a day, sometimes more, sometimes less. Just to give you a little perspective on how long it is taking me to finish roughly 70% of my army. Now, this is only a recon-sized Star Wars Legion force, which is the smaller of the two sizes, 600 points versus 1,000 points. So at some point, I would like to make it the full 1,000, but I want to take a little bit of a break from Star Wars Legion and focus on some other army projects in the meantime. If you enjoyed watching me paint these Star Wars Legion models over the course of the last 4 videos or so, I have several other series on my channel that you can also tune into to watch, such as my Drakari, or my Soulblight Gravelords, or my Cawdor for Necromunda, or my Greyjoy for A Song of Ice and Fire. I'll have all those links down in the description below if you want to watch more army painting goodness. That's all for now. We're going to keep the weekly releases rolling next Monday, so I hope to see you tune in for that as well. Saturday! And most importantly, don't forget until...